to have them either.
I have my little thing. I have one that all this other
But oh no, and I have one on my neck that radiates this far, probably about that far, so that'll protect you a little bit. No, I can't do that because of the carpet's uneven then. Then my seat's uneven.
Oh, true.
Oh, there's one in the first, and the radiates 1,000 feet out. So we're good.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to our home group here today. We're so excited for today. I feel like the panels are they're just so encouraging, and I just walk away feeling so refreshed. Like, you kind of walk in, like, I feel like this last week I've even had, like, can I do this? Am I even doing this right? Like, that insecurity we all have, and then I always walk away after these just like, okay, it's okay. I got this. It's, we're going to make it. So I had a psalm that I was wanting to read a little bit of. Let's see here. All right. Yes. So Psalm 78 just kind of came to my mind as I think about just what we're doing as moms and the kind of foundation that you guys have laid. And it goes like this: Give ear, O my people, to my law. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from our children, telling to the generation to come the praises of the Lord and his strength and his wonderful works he has done. For he has established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers, that they should make them known to their children, that the generation to come might know them, the children who would be born, that they may arise and declare them to their children, that they may set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but his commandments, and may not be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation that did not set its heart aright, and whose spirit was not faithful to God. And I just want to thank you guys for being women who've gone forth in such, and like we think there's times that are hard today, but I know it was way different back then too. And I just thank you so much for what you've done in following God, in trying to raise, godly children and educating them, because I think it's the big reason why we're doing this also is to just make the Lord known to our children, and that's such a huge part of this. So thank you for what I believe is following him and being willing to share your encouragement and stuff with us. And I'm going to start us with a quick word of prayer. So, Holy Father, I just thank you so much for this day and for these ladies that are here and that they can just share their wisdom and just help encourage us. I thank you so much for all that you do and all that you provide for us day in and day out. And I just pray that you'll just help us to walk away feeling uplifted and just trusting in you more and more and just seeking you and your guidance as we raise our children. First and foremost, to know you, and second, to educate them. I pray this in your holy name. Amen. All right. So if you guys don't mind, I'll have each one of you give me your name and some information. But first, before I forget, our next gathering will be on January 6th, and it'll be the one-room schoolhouse by Nancy. And Nancy Scooball will be here. She was on our panel last year, and so you guys will recognize her. So yeah, that'll be a lot of fun. And all right, so I'll have each one of you just give us your name, maybe where you're from, and any information on how long you homeschooled, or just what you want to tell us about you. So, yeah.
I'm Dorcas Gerard. This is really loud, isn't it? I'm from Washington. My husband and I farm just north of Washington, about 5 miles. And we have 2 children. Micah is 22, and we homeschooled both the children all the way through. Beginning to end. Emma Ruth is 19. I graduated her 2 years ago, so she got through it a little earlier, but that was hard work on her part, not high IQ or anything. She just was determined to get out as soon as possible. But and they're both working full-time in the ag businesses as well.
Hi, I'm Kristen Durkee, and I am from across the river in Illinois. And my husband and I have 3 children. We also farm, and our kids are. We started homeschooling when they were basically. I mean, we all homeschool from the time that our kids are born because we're teaching them things. But we homeschooled all the way through. But we did dual enroll our children when they were in high school. And at that time, we were living in Burlington, so they were dual enrolled at BHS for those years. And right now, let's see, they are, I have to think, because they've all had their birthdays. They are 31, 30, and 28. And they're all married and have children, and we have 9 grandchildren. So they're all working as well, thankfully, voting citizens and so forth.
I'm Sharon Pilling, and we also farm. So you've got a farm panel today. We can answer
Yeah.
lots of questions. It was a different topic, and we could probably go further. Or our husbands could. We have 3 children, and we homeschooled all the way, except we used community college for a couple courses for the oldest, and then for the senior year of the youngest. And so, and the other one was already, I can't remember what, you guys gotta know, you will forget so much. And so all the things you're worrying about, you're gonna forget that you were ever worrying about these things. But we used community college at the very end, at the senior year, mostly. And one was to hurry up a child who needed to get out sooner and get to college sooner as well. So that throws off my count of birthdays and graduation years, because they were all going to be even years, and now one of them is on odd years. And so all your life you're like, well, they'll be graduating in this class, and this class. No, and now it's all different. So they are 31, 33, and 35. And they are also all married, and we have 7 grandchildren. And they are scattered to the winds, Wisconsin, New York, and Kansas. So we don't get to see them as much as we would like to, but and they also would like to come home more often than they can. But life is busy when you have young children. So.
Fun fact, Sharon and I were in the same homeschool co-op together with our children. We much enjoyed those years.
I wondered if you 2 knew each other somehow. I feel like everyone that homeschooled, like, just, you kind of all know each other, you know, so, yeah.
Like Dorcas and I are in sister churches, so we've also known each other our
really?
homeschool years, just not the same group of interactions during the week.
That's so sweet. I love it, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I feel like once you find another homeschool mom, you're like, oh, we just became best friends.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. So our first question I have for you guys is, what did a typical day look like for you? Such as like routines or subjects you always had, or, you know, what did a typical day look like?
We can just go in order like we've been doing.
Sure. That sounds good.
That's a good question, really. You know, it always changed, and you'd always have to be flexible. We aim to start the same time every day, just to be consistent and get a routine. I don't know if it was partially farming or what, but it didn't seem to work sometimes we'd get a good weekend. But anyway, we'd start in the morning. We always started with devotions, just as a school, as a Bible class. So we tried different books and stuff, but we tried to just start with that, a memory verse, and then go right into the academic classes, you know, math, language arts, history, science, whatever we had at the time. We tried different years, and it didn't matter if they were older or younger. It just seemed like maybe what we were trying to accomplish that year. We tried to finish by noon because the kids were done by then. I was done by then. But sometimes we'd have to do like another hour after lunch. And of course, having a husband that came home for lunch, we had to quit at a little bit before noon so I could get lunch ready and then stuff like that. So they mostly had the afternoons free. We did have a co-op that we used, and they had classes on Thursdays in the afternoon. And so that was my time to go to run errands. You know, that's the grocery shopping day and stuff. And then Tuesdays was a sports day, so that was our PE day, afternoon or evening, depending on what they did. They did different sports. So that was kind of our general schedule. Is that what you were kind of looking for?
Yeah.
Yeah, we were somewhat similar because we would start out the day with our some type of a devotion or prayer time, both usually, and that was, well, we did that with as a family before my husband left for work, and the kids we would start that very first thing in the morning. All of the kids would come and jump into bed with us, and that's how we would start our day. But then the kids and I would start our school day the same way, essentially, too. So we would have another kind of little shorter time together just to kind of get our minds in the right state, I guess. And so that was very helpful. If we ever skipped that, it was very noticeable, I would say. But so we generally did not skip that. But then we would go right into the other subjects, and I always tried to have little breaks scheduled in. We usually started school. I would try to have everyone start fairly early in the morning because I wanted to also be done by noon, and that way we could have the rest of the day. Just it worked out well for us, and I knew my kids needed to have time to just be kids and run around and. So, yeah, and so we just kind of stuck to that schedule. I would say that having some little breaks built in was helpful. Some of the breaks that I had were technically not breaks, but the kids thought they were. So it was a little bit of a little deceptive maybe on my part, but it was like, okay, when you guys finish this, then I will let you have 15 minutes playing this game on the computer, but it was like a math game or something, So like that was how you're practicing your times tables and you don't even know it. So, but things like that. But it's helped give them a little bit of relief and a little bit of a break, and then there was some transition time between things, and give me a moment to kind of regroup or something, if I needed to gather some materials or something like that, then they were usually all doing whatever this other activity was that I may have had planned. But the afternoons, this was when they were younger. So as they got older, your day gets longer. So you do have to usually devote more time just because the academic subjects take so much longer. And I think that we probably started seeing that happen probably around 6th grade, maybe a little bit in like 5th grade level, but I think not too bad that way. But it was probably more around 6th grade, and then definitely in high school for sure. It was maxed out. We were maxed out. So yeah, and then we also had lots of other activities that the kids participated in, sports and music and art and all of those things. Piano lessons, of course, and Awana, and all the things that you guys have offered to you as well. And those things take up time, and you do have to kind of make a schedule a little bit. Sometimes you have to decide, is it worth it to, participate in that? And sometimes the answer to that was no, because of the season of farming for us, or just the season of life we were going through. So I think it's good to be flexible. And that's something that I had to learn. So I just would like to encourage you in that, to be flexible. It's okay. You don't have to say yes to everything every year, but some years you might be able to. So
Flexibility is definitely the game. I'll start with a typical week because that's easier to go into, especially when they were young. So when they were 2, 4, and 6, we started homeschooling the first one. They were all summer birthdays, so we waited until they were 6 intentionally for other reasons as well. And so a typical week would be school at home on Mondays, community Bible study on Tuesdays down in Fort Madison, which was a drive, so that was our errand day too because we were already out and about. And then Wednesday was a school day at home, and then Thursday was a homeschool activity day. So whatever was scheduled for the homeschoolers, whether that was the co-op years or whether that was field trips or roller skating, that Thursday varied. But the group tried to keep it on Thursday, partly because community Bible study was already on Tuesdays, and so we didn't want to conflict with. And many of us were participating in both of those activities as well. And then Friday was school at home until about 3rd grade. After the 3rd grade year, because I knew we needed longer in the day as well. And finishing by noon was a pipe dream, even when they were little, guys. How did you do that? We did not do that much, but we did.
yeah, sheer determination.
Jim was out the door earlier, so he often didn't, in season, he never saw the kids, except on Sundays. So Sundays became our kids' absolute favorite day of the week, because Dad was home. And so, so anyway, and then a typical day, I'll jump into the middle years. They could have been done earlier in the day had they chosen to be done earlier in the day. Once they could read, they were much more independent in their work. When they weren't reading, then of course I had to meet one-on-one with the non-readers, and I had 2 non-readers for quite one more longer than normal. But so that took a lot more time, dedicated time to keep on working on that. But I had built an Excel spreadsheet with their lesson plans for the week all laid out, which got erased and changed all week long. And because never a day, like, okay, you can get this done. So I got good practice drawing arrows. This goes to this day, this goes to this day. Next week we'll catch up on that subject.
That happens.
On the times that Jim was home, he led family worship in the evenings after supper. Most of the time it was after supper. And then during the school day, I would, it varied a lot. We would either work on scripture memory, or I did individual Bible studies with them some years. We never did a Bible curriculum of any kind. We just did life and read the Word and memorized. They're such good memorizers when they're young. So, man, fill them up, guys. Fill them up, because then they'll remember it now when they're in their 60s. They'll remember. Trying to think how the days could get long if you had one that drug your foot, and so there was no time that we were done particularly. And we just said, you are stopping now, and we'll start again tomorrow. Because if you drag it on, you all get weary. So that's a typical weekday.
Yeah, that's great. Did you ever utilize any specials or enrichment like PE, music, and art?
Just being with the group, our homeschool group, we used the sports because they did it every week, and they changed sport type every 4 weeks. So they got exposed to every single sport out there, literally. And so we used that as our PE. And they did take piano lessons, both of them, and Emma took recorder lessons as well. So that was their music. We did a lot of field trips with our group, lots and lots of those, which would have been wonderful. That was my favorite part. Other extracurricular like art, I mean, I'm artsy, that's just me, and so we did a lot of art, which drove them crazy. But if there's a gal in our church that she was an art major, and so I actually had her do some special things with the kids that would be totally unique to what I could do. So I took advantage of her, so those would be extras I can think of from our family.
Our kids, as far as art, we did so many different things that way. Our kids took lessons at the Art Center in Burlington. Also participated in something. We're kind of in between Burlington, Iowa, and Monmouth, Illinois. So we would kind of go both directions for different things. So they had some things over there as well, and we would have them enter contests a lot of times, like drawing contests and things like that, so that they would be inspired to practice. And our son Kendall did fairly well in those, actually. He was always a little bit our creative child. And then let's see, what else did we do for art? I have an older cousin who she actually had some mental health issues. But she was an amazing artist, and she was unable, because of some of her mental health issues, unable to hold down a regular job. And so her days were a little bit more flexible. So I had asked her if she would like to come and do private art classes for us at our house, and she just loved it. So it was one of those special connections that just worked really well for both of us, and I think it was a real blessing to her, and it was definitely a real blessing to us also. So that was wonderful. So if you can find someone like that, you guys apparently had similar experience with a friend, somebody who would be willing to do that, I really recommend that, because wow, it's great not to have to leave the house for something, especially when you live in the country. Like, you're always driving for everything. And so it was amazing having her come right to the house, and she had everything with her that she needed. I had to do nothing to prepare. So it was just a great time, and that went on for a couple of years, and we enjoyed that immensely. Also, they did music lessons through a wonderful elder woman at our church, and so that was very convenient because she would be willing to arrange. we typically had the lessons on a scheduled day, but if we needed to rearrange, if we were coming into church, or coming into town, and we attended church in Burlington, but if we were coming into town already for something else, oftentimes she would be willing to rearrange her schedule a little bit for us, and so then she would do the lesson at that time. I'm trying to think what else. What was the question again?
Like your specials, PE, music, and art.
Yeah, specials. Yeah. Oh yeah, as far as sports or PE, we always had a scheduled playtime. It wasn't really scheduled, but it was just like, we're going to do this at some point. And it was always when my husband would get home from work, and we had a big yard, so we would always go outside and play in the yard, and I don't know, we had all kinds of games. And then, we would practice with them, baseball. If you have more than a couple of kids, you can do almost anything. We played Foursquare all the time on the sidewalk out behind our house, and we would invite friends over, or my parents would come stop by. My dad also farmed, and so oftentimes he would be driving around, somewhere nearby, and he might see us out playing, and he would go right, get right into the game. We also had horses, so the kids would ride horses whenever the weather was appropriate, and horses make great babysitters too if you happen to have one. So if you need a moment. We also utilize a lot of town ball, because at the time, especially in Illinois, there was no dual enrollment allowed. So we had to be a little bit creative that way as far as organized sports. So our kids did sports through the YMCA. We had swimming. They were in swimming every year, either a couple times a year usually, because I always have of the opinion, I guess, if we have water near us, I want my kids to know how to swim, because I don't ever want to have an issue with that. So they would, and we had several things that were organized, which were really nice, through our homeschool co-op, which Well, we were in a couple of different co-ops. So we were in a weekly co-op and we were in a monthly co-op. And so our monthly co-op was just a very, very small group of women and children who were in our immediate area. And we had what we called theme days. So we would come up with a theme. It was much like having doing a unit study, but just in one day. So all of the moms would participate, one mom would host, and then all the other moms would have the activities that were related to that particular topic. But anyway, one thing that we did that was helpful as a group was organized swim lessons, and they were private lessons, so that was even better. And we had the best teacher, and she had us several years running, and we even, she would even drag out like a canoe and do boat safety and things like that in the pool. So it was super fun. Town ball, though, is great to take advantage of. I would say, like, if you guys have baseball or anything like that to do too, those are great. Ice skating, wait, there's so much you can do. I mean, you don't have to be in an organized sport, but you know, you gotta get them out. You gotta get them outside, and you gotta let them run it all off. You know. Also, farm work. That was a big one too.
When they were younger, we had a big yard also, and I have a husband that's very handy, and so he, at my request, made a balance beam and made bars for them to hang on, and of course we already had a sandbox by then, and we had a couple of trees that were climbable, especially one that's got its famous name, the climbing tree. But it's the most, your kids have been to the top, at least three of your kids have been to the top, and so. And that's something that they love to do. And I gave them breaks too during the day that they could just run and do that. In homeschool groups, we had roller skating, and there was swimming, but I don't know that we ever went to the swimming there, but we had lessons at the Y, and then when they were older, lessons in Minneapolis at the pool. Because it's the same. I didn't want them to ever not know how to swim. I did not know how to swim until 7th or 8th grade, and I still could probably not swim to save my life. And I wanted them to be able to swim well enough to save their lives and to have a good time, which I did not have either, since I couldn't swim very well at all. When they got older, my husband is not into sports at all, and I am not either, but there was a homeschool basketball team for a while, but the year that was available, our son was old enough to do it, we gave him the choice of doing homeschool basketball or guitar lessons because we couldn't afford both. And he chose guitar lessons, which surprised me, but it was a blessing in disguise because the fathers who were coaching the basketball team decided that their children were done with it and they quit. And so if he chose basketball, he would have been sorely disappointed. So I'm not remembering other things, but like you said, every time you could get them outdoors to move, especially outdoors. We took lots of nature walks, so we were out walking in parks and at home.
Thank you. I feel like the specials can seem a little overrated, so I appreciate hearing, how you guys implemented and how important they can kind of be. So, looking back, what is something you wish you would have spent more time on, or is there something you wish you spent less time on?
Less time probably pops out for me more because I did probably homeschool to get academics accomplished. I know a lot of people that even to this day, you've got to get the academics done so they can graduate and follow the law and all this stuff. But homeschooling, that's the whole reason it's flexible, is you don't have to, there are the credits to graduate, but you make them. You tell them, the state, what you're studying. They don't tell you what to study. And I was so obsessed with getting, and I did that. When I got to high school, I was doing all of that. I mean, they didn't take the regular classes that everybody else did. I chose. But up until then, we were obsessed with, okay, they have to read by this time, we have to get this math done, they have to know these things in this order. And I would I wouldn't go to the extreme of I don't know what that is called, I can't remember, where they naturally learn, you know, they just do everything.
Unschooling?
Yeah, I wouldn't go that far. But I wanted them to read, and I wanted them to know all the academics. But to obsess over, we got to get this done. I wish we had spent more time, okay, this is stressful. Yeah, when those things would happen, we'd back away. You know, like Micah was really bad at math. It was very difficult. We had to go very, very slow with him through all of it. But I didn't quit enough. I didn't step back enough and do other things. I was so obsessed with, we still have to finish, we still have to get this done. And that's what I regret. I'd say do less of obsessing over the academics. Work on their hearts, work on them being children, letting them be children, letting them grow naturally, let them explore, adding more exploration to the book work. That's what I'd say I would change. More time would be the opposite then. More time letting that. So I guess I said both of them at the same time. Less and more. So that's what pops in my head is those things in our family.
That's very insightful. Yeah, well, the one, I was just talking about music and the arts, and I think that if I were to add anything or spend more time on anything, it probably would have been more of that, actually, more music and the arts. And that is a difficult area oftentimes for homeschooling families because it is not organized, but that can also be a benefit as well because you have so much flexibility in what you can choose and do. But I do think that I would have encouraged our children probably to continue with an instrument longer, maybe pick up another instrument as well. Probably would have attended more concerts, that sort of thing. And as far as with art, I did do some art as far as like what we would do personally at home, involving, you know, just sketching or, you know, doing like crafts, some small crafts or things like that. We did a lot of nature type of things, and I think that if I were to do more, I think I would have enjoyed doing more of that. I think the kids would have benefited from that quite a bit, just in their inner person, you know, like even if there was no other value for that, like academically speaking, I think that those moments that you're spending like in nature and contemplating your thoughts and you know, seeing what your creator has done, those are really valuable. So I think we would have probably done more of that. One thing, and this may surprise you, and I don't mean any offense to anyone. If I hope that it won't offend anyone. But one thing that I think I would do less of would be we participated in so many different things, and one thing that we did participate in was of great benefit to many people, but sometimes, like I said, sometimes you just have to make choices. I think I really wish that we probably would have stayed home on Sunday evenings from our Awana Club. I know that sounds awful, but it was just a little bit much probably for us. It was a bit of a stretch for us to have that evening. And Awana can be a really great thing, but oh my goodness, he's so cute. It's hard to ignore that. Yeah, so Awana is a great thing, but we had some other different things where our kids were already, you know, kind of having that the same benefits of the Awana Club. So that was something that we continued to do, but it was like, you know, every time kind of for me, it was really difficult. And if I could go back and tell myself to do one thing differently, it would probably be, you know, just let that go. It's okay, you know, because now I can see that from the other side, and I know that they were, you know, we wanted our kids to hide God's word in their heart, and it was beneficial in that way. It did not hurt them, for sure, but there were other ways that they were receiving that, so I think that might be one thing I would change, spend less time on.
I wanted to double back on they did art with their grandma at a class once. Their grandma came and picked them up, and she took the class with them. And this just came up because in October, one of our daughters was going through her memorabilia at our house, and out came some of these samples from that art class, and they were laughing about how much fun they had had with grandma at that art class, and how fun it was to watch grandma do the art so differently than they were each doing the art. So that, and they did have piano lessons, and I'm wondering whether we had the same teacher. Yes, same teacher. Who also did move her schedule and location around for us as well when we needed to. So yes. The only thing they didn't like was recitals, though.
Yeah.
They could play their piece perfectly at home, and never, ever in a recital. I don't think they ever got it perfectly. Yes.
Well, we did the oral report night, right? Your girls, you did that too.
We did the co-op at Weaver with oral reports.
I'm trying to remember if it was in Weaver. I remember doing it at Oak Street.
Oh, maybe.
Okay. Well, that was kind of what I would consider a special also that I just remembered. So that would be something, if your kids are not in 4-H, or even if they are and they have the opportunity to get up and do some public speaking, that is a huge benefit for, especially for homeschool families, because, you know, they're just sometimes not around people as often, and it's a very important skill to learn. And you want your children to be able to share the gospel with people also. They need to be able to be comfortable. And even if they're not comfortable, it's like anything else. You just have to practice it and do it. So, you know, that's something I would highly recommend. It was very beneficial to our kids. Our 4-H was something that was very helpful for us as well, just connecting with other people in the community and having opportunities for public speaking and getting out. And several of our children, actually I think I was going to say 2 of them, but I think all 3 of them participated in an event. It was entitled The Great Debate, and they were able to go to the state capitol, and they were on the House floor debating bills and that sort of thing. So it was a wonderful opportunity, and they did that a couple of years in high school. And then our second son was, our first son, our second child was invited to speak at a local group to share his experience with that. And so that was another opportunity for him to share, or to speak publicly and put into practice what he had learned all those different times throughout the years. So I would recommend those kinds of things as well, because those are things you may not think of. But that was I don't know why I didn't think of that earlier, but that might be something that you might want to start implementing just on a small scale.
Yeah, I had forgotten about 4-H. I don't know why, because that was such a major part of our lives. And that was wonderful, because when you're used to doing everything with the church, with your church group or your homeschool group, that gives them out in the community where they're not exposed as much to. And I thought that was really helpful for growing and giving them something outside the box, you know, exposure.
Yeah.
I have to do the more or less question yet. Much more scripture memory, and if my children are listening to this, I can hear them groaning, because they probably feel like, how could we have done more? But they could have done more, and I wish I had done more with them of the scripture memory. Even though they passed me by miles and they could get it down in one day, and I'd take a week or more, depending. So more scripture memory. Dorcas, I am with you. Less academics or less intense focus on the academics. I was able to restrain myself some because of some really good resources that I had read about not hurrying your children, not pushing your children, and that the academics aren't why you're doing it, even though they have to be done. Sadly, they have to be done. I would love to have been able to do unschooling, but you need motivated children to do homeschool or unschooling because they need to desire to study the different topics of their interests, not go, oh yeah, I'm interested in that, but I don't want to do school with it. You know, don't make it into a project, Mom, don't ruin it, that kind of thing. And you don't want to ruin your kids' interests. If that would ruin their interests, do not build school around their loves. Let them build their loves themselves. And that's, there was one, when she said about staying home on Sunday nights, it reminded me of the year that I think only our girls were old enough still to be coming here to the Sunday night Bible club. But they nearly begged us, could they please stay home on Sunday nights? Because when they left for Bible club, we went to Grandma's and Aunt Julie was there, and they wanted time with Aunt Julie in particular at Grandma's house, and all they could do was hear about our Sunday evenings together, and they wanted that so badly. And we don't regret that decision once, even though it was really hard because of the peer pressure of attending the church where you're not taking your children to that activity, and it's a very small group of children. So you could have just left the children, you should have just made that class be not 2 students, but now 1. So that's how hard that decision was. But that Aunt Julie was a very special person to them, and she passed when she was 42 in 2007. And so we don't regret that they got to have that extra time with Aunt Julie and Grandma by staying home from Bible club that year, the next year.
That is so sweet. All right, I want to tap into that just a little bit more. So what do you think drove you to try to be, as what you talked about, Dorcas, and Sharon, and just how do you know, like when you're going that direction of being too academic, like how do you know when you're pushing too hard or when we're just trying to get them to be diligent? I feel like that's kind of a struggle. So yeah, do you have any wisdom on that?
It was probably more on how much I tried to cover. That they didn't really have to have all that I was wanting to cover, and that you still felt like, well, yeah, if I don't, we're gonna have gaps. And I heard a speaker, I wish I could remember her name, I may yet, speak, and she said, you will have gaps. There will be tons of gaps. How many gaps are in your own education? Don't try to you can't fill all the gaps. That life is for learning, and you can't fill them all. There were some excellent authors. If you guys run across the older books about homeschooling, I don't know about any of the newer ones, but the older ones, The Hurried Child, and I think David Elkind is another author to look up, on delaying academics, on not emphasizing the academics. They will learn in spite of us. And then you knew you were pushing them too hard when it was stressing you out all the time too. So you're stressing them out and you're stressing yourself out. It was like, this is not what this should look like. This should not be all of us pulling our hair out or wanting to go in the closet and be left alone. It shouldn't look like that. So when it starts to look like that, and you can't find your child because they do not want to be found.
Yeah.
And when you'd rather go be in the closet yourself, then you know you're probably too hard.
Yeah, I would agree. That's probably a good sign of pushing the academics too hard. I don't know if I was learning anything, but Emma struggled with reading, and Micah struggled with math.
Is that enough? I think.
And like I said, we kept pushing. Well, now he works for HVAC. He has to know math. We quit at Algebra 2 because he struggled so hard. We got the minimum done, that he needed for credits to graduate because he struggled. But we just fought and fought and fought through the whole thing, and now it comes naturally because he's learning as he's doing things. We just didn't pick up on that. Well, we didn't know to pick up on that. So a little bit with Emma and her reading, my mom was a teacher. She was a middle school teacher. And she said, Emma's not reading, Emma's not reading. Now, this is not at 2. This is at 7. She's not reading very well. And I said, you know what? I think she's going to read fine when she's ready to read. And she reads perfectly fine, obviously. And it wasn't long after that she just, caught on. So even though I had those little things happened, we still always were pressing everything else. We have to have history from Genesis to the present. We need to learn all the presidents. We need to learn all the states and the capitals. And do you? Do you really need to know every single country on the planet and their, whatever capitals? Do you? Those are things you have to ask yourself. How important is all those little teeny things? What's the most important? That's how I look at it.
Oh, that's so great.
Jen, I have told you this before, I think, but in the beginning of our homeschool years, I was trying to, I think, emulate the public school model at home because it was so new. And there were resources, but they were more limited back then. And I just, I didn't know. And there was a little bit of fear back in that day as well because it was so new and there was just no one, hardly anyone was doing it. And, if we had a knock at the door, it was like, oh,
We were the fishbowl.
Yeah, for sure. And, we were the ones that had trained our kids if we were out in public to say, oh, we don't have school today, or, we got out early or something like that, because people would be like, what are you doing out of school? I mean, people would ask our kids that, so we had to train them with an answer. But Alan, at one point, my husband had said to me, if you're going to do this just like public school, why don't we just send them to public school? And I thought, okay, I needed to hear that. Yeah, I really needed to hear that. And I was thankful that he said that early on. And it was, I think you need to give yourself a little bit of grace and be patient with yourself, because you're learning as well what works and how to do it. But I guess I would just encourage all of you, if you haven't gotten to that place yet where you can be flexible and do what works for your family, to just do that. It's okay to do that, and you don't have to do it. Now, some people really thrive doing it in kind of a public school model, and if that works for you really well, I would say go for it, because that's great if that works for you, and if that is less stress for your family and everyone responds well to that, there's nothing wrong with you doing it that way. So I wouldn't take what we're saying and say, this is absolutely the way you must do it for a stress-free life, because some people might have much less stress doing it the other way. So, but yeah, maybe the emphasis, there are other things to learn. There's so, and if you teach your kids how to learn, they'll always be learning, and so you don't have to put that pressure on yourself.
Yeah. I appreciate your answer so much with this, because I think this is such a hard thing to know how to balance. So thank you so much. So what would you guys do about sibling fighting or squabbles?
Oh, we were a failure at this, I think. We just did discipline them as we would if they disobeyed in any other way, whether spanking or timeouts or taking away privileges, depended on the situation or how aggressive the issue was between them. Sometimes you just need to separate them and make them realize how much they, especially since only having two, they were each other's playmates. So making them not be allowed to play with each other, that really hit home a lot of times. But yeah, just regular discipline, because I don't know what else you do other than it's disobeying when they're fighting, so you treat it like it. That's not probably very helpful, but
We were at a homeschool conference and we came across a book called Making Brothers and Sisters Best Friends, and I highly recommend that book. We really enjoyed it. The kids read portions of it, and it was great. We were able to implement a few things from that, and I always kind of feel like if you can implement one thing that a speaker says or something that you read in a book, that you're better off than you were before. So we did a few things from that book that were really helpful to our family. One of the things, as by way of example, is having one of the siblings be the beneficiary of the other siblings doing something to make them feel appreciated. So everyone would get a turn during the week. And one thing, I may have shared this, you may have heard this before, Jen, but this is kind of a whoa example. You will probably be a little shocked, but and we were too. It was just really sweet. But one of our children had done something. This was very early. This was still during like spanking years. Okay, so one of the children had done something that required a spanking for discipline, and it happened to be that child's day to receive appreciation or some kind of special service or something like that from the other siblings. So one of the siblings said, "I would like to take that child's spankings." And so that was hugely impactful, as you can imagine, on all of us. We were just like shocked and awed and wow, we're getting through. Thank you, Lord. Wow, that was just a huge extreme example. Anyway, there were lots of little fun examples of that, and we had so much fun with that. So that was when that book was very helpful, Making Brothers and Sisters Best Friends. I would also say, have fun, because if your kids are having a fun time together, if they're enjoying school because you're having fun, you're encouraging them, you're taking breaks, you're always looking to the next thing, like making it seem like it's this fun thing that they're going to get to do, and these are the reasons why, and and you're looking to, you just have to encourage quite a bit. You be their cheerleader, and just encourage them to have a lot of fun together as siblings. Play games and just have a great time, and they'll get along quite a bit better. But yeah, you do definitely have to separate them for sure at times, and send them outside, let them run off that aggression that they might be having toward one another. Sometimes they just need to run, so we would send our kids a lot of times outside and just say, okay, run around the house 5 times as fast as you can, and there they would go, because you could just tell that they just needed to burn off something, whatever it was, some naughtiness.
By the time they were 2, 4, and 6, we had a basement playroom. And so I remember thinking, I won't be able to see what's going on. I won't be able to see who's causing the problems as much, because oftentimes there's one instigator in a family, or one that's the primary instigator. But I learned to listen from the top of the basement stairs. Do I need to intervene, or do I not? Are they working on this or not? Because you've modeled it, you've trained them to work out their difficulties with each other as well. So I just tried to learn at some point to start stepping back and seeing if they worked it out in a way that seemed appropriate, or whether somebody was constantly being picked on and needed some intervention there. And they really did get along really well for, I'm always pleased to when I look back and see how well they did get along. They really did get along pretty well most of the time. But there were times that there were shrieks and fights over toys and things. And I learned along the way, you know how important that we all think that we have to teach these children, especially when they're really little, to share. And they're not wanting to share when they're 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. You know, we don't like to share. So anyway, I learned about property rights. There's a biblical principle that we are allowed to own property. And so if that child owned that toy and they even were not playing with it, but somebody else wanted to, they still had control of that toy, which is important, especially, I'm a firstborn. Younger siblings tend to ruin our stuff. And so that's really hard on that firstborn who's always made to share and loses all his stuff. And his stuff's all ruined because the little ones, you have to share with your siblings. So that was really important to teach them, and to teach them how to do that well, so they weren't using that as a tool to get mean to their siblings. No, you cannot play with my toy. You know, that kind of attitude. If they were just saying, no, I'm protecting it, or I'm going to play with it soon, or whatever, that was fine. That was their decision that they could make about their property when it come to a certain point in their lives where I felt they were making it fairly and justly and not selfishly, and using it as a weapon against their sibling. I have to share that my daughter's mother-in-law had 5 boys, and then a come lately special needs daughter. So during those years when she had 5 boys, I love this one story that she told about how she dealt with the boys, and there were 5 boys, so they were constantly on each other all the time. She would just, if they were fighting, she would just have them sit on the couch and hold hands until they could work it out. And for boys to be made to hold each other's hands was not, that was getting worked out very, very quickly. And I just have to laugh because I'm learning to know who she is. And she could do all that and very seriously, and probably then go in the kitchen and laugh her head off while she was listening to them work it out in the other room. So that's all I can think of at the moment. But I did remember Diana Waring was a history one that had a lot of great history curriculum, and especially stuff on tape. She could speak history a mile a minute, Genesis to the present, in a way that you could understand it and remember it. But she was the one that said you will have gaps, and she talked about her child calling from college saying, Mom, you did not prepare me for college. How did this happen? And she goes, well, this is where we need to rely on God's grace. Maybe we need to hire a tutor, but you'll make it. It'll be fine. And we had a similar situation with our son when he got to physics in college level, because we couldn't do physics well at home either. And I don't think he ended up getting a tutor. I think he had help from friends that were in his class. And so what am I from with that? That you will have gaps in it. We definitely see those gaps later when they do enter secondary and college education, that, oh wow, we didn't prepare them, but it's okay, because this is part of God's plan. This is who they are. This is how they have to figure out to rely on the Lord and to find out what the resources are. So I just wanted to remind that one.
It's a great reminder. God fills the gaps. All right. How did you try to steer your children towards following Christ?
Mostly, I guess desiring that they would see Christ in us as parents, emulating Him in how we treated each other, Rob and I, and treated the children as examples. Having, of course, church family and so on, going to church and doing different activities that are associated with it, like kids clubs or whatever. And then having a homeschool group with Christian families. But just as an individual family, we had devotions as our, like I said, as our opening to our school day. it was just me and the kids. Rob was always gone, and I mean, you know, he'd leave earlier. But that was like the start of our school day, and then we did our family devotions in the evening, like right before bed. We literally, that was what we did, and then went to bed. And Rob would lead those, and we had them memorize scripture, and let me see my notes here. I did write some things. I guess that's mostly what I would have how we approached it. Try to expose them to as much, kind of the opposite, like when Micah was first playing baseball. He did play baseball. Both of the kids did t-ball, and he went on to baseball. But the environment was toxic, and so that's the example of making sure that he doesn't stay in that toxic environment. We quit because he wasn't getting exposed to Christian values, but the opposite. So, you know, that was a health decision we had to make for his Christian walk.
Well, I would second many of the things that Dorcas had to share. I'm sure you're all thinking about Deuteronomy 6, but you know, you just talk about these things, you talk about these things, and you talk about these things all day long, and you just try to apply whatever it is that you have been learning through reading the scriptures. You just try to work that in. I think this is one of the best things about homeschooling, is that you just have time to do that, and you can stop whatever else it is that you're doing. I mean, if you're reading something in your curriculum that sparks, you know, a connection to what you read earlier in scripture. I mean, maybe you're reading a biography or something like that. I'm just giving an example. And you can discuss that and say, you know, how do you think that would, you know, what would you do in this situation? Or what do you think the Bible has to say about that? Or, wow, that reminds me of what, you know, Jesus said, or whatever, you know, you can apply it. And so I would say that's one of the biggest benefits. And I would also say just having your children involved with lots of other families and people who are mature, godly examples and can say things and speak into your kids' lives in ways that they are saying the same things that you're saying, but they're not you, and it's good to have other influences that are reflecting Christ to your kids. Maybe in a little different way too. You know, everyone has a little different style of teaching or talking or speaking, and someone else might be able to reach your child in a way that you haven't been able to for some reason. So, you know, God has put us, He's told us to encourage one another, build each other up, not to just, you know, that we need to be in fellowship with one another. And so we're not supposed to do this alone, and I would just encourage you not to do it alone. Don't try to homeschool alone. I mean, obviously you're not, because you're here, part of this group already, but yeah, I mean, get involved in some things if you're not, where your kids are going to have some of those kinds of connections with other families. Especially if you have boys, I think it's really important to have them, you know, be involved in activities like at church where they're going to be, or with other godly families that have another mature, spiritually mature dad or male influence. There was a conference that we had the opportunity to attend one year. But then we had said, you know, I think maybe it's not going to work out. And so we didn't sign anybody up for it. Well, it and then it was like, oh, it was last minute, you know, and we couldn't get everybody, I think that was completely booked up or something at the time, but a lot of people from our church were going to be attending this, and our one son, it turned out that someone had to back out that was going to be attending, and so there was one opening, and we were given the opportunity because someone had known our family had some interest in it, but it was like, oh, we can't all go, and so it was, what do we do? You know, we ended up sending one of our children, one of our boys, because, and this was an overnight conference, you guys. So this is why I'm saying this is kind of a big deal. Okay, it's a big deal. So we ended up sending one of our boys, and he roomed in the hotel with an older gentleman from our church. That was one of the best experiences. They really connected and just had such a great time together. Later on, when our kids were a little bit older, this man and his wife had different jobs that they had at their house that they would, and they lived fairly far away from us, but once our kids got to driving age, they had some jobs and they would call on our kids and ask, you know, could you come and take care of this? Because they had developed a relationship, and anyway, he was such a great guy. He still is a great guy. He's still living. I'm so thankful for him. And anyway, I would just encourage you guys to have those kinds, to try to develop those kinds of relationships too, so that other people can speak into your kids' lives.
Well, we pray as Christian moms and dads that our children will never know a time that they didn't believe the Lord and His truths. And you teach them their need of Christ, and you are reminded of your need of Christ every day, so you remind them that you need Christ as badly as they do as well. All the things that they talked about with scripture memory and the activities, we also used when they got older and you're really wanting them to own the faith that they say they have, retreats. And our church has something called Theological Foundations for Youth that's usually between the junior and senior year in the summer, where they read some theological books and some practicality books, and then men from the seminary and other pastors and things teach them. And it's a 3-week thing, I think. Then there's a week that's where the rubber meets the road, and they go to the local churches. It's out by Pittsburgh. They go to local churches and they help with the vacation Bible schools or whatever that church needs. And that's where they got to meet different people. So our son met his wife now, and and then retreats is where one of our daughters met her husband as well. So they also are meeting their spouses at some of these events that when your church is really small and you're like, if they don't leave this building, there's not a lot going on. And you do want them to find godly spouses as well. So I guess more our own need of Christ is really what really, if we're willing to be humble before our children and let them know that we need the Lord as badly as they do, that we're not using Christ as you've got to believe, you've got that kind of thing, and also not making them feel insecure, not to step on anybody's theological toes, but when our children were going to community Bible study, they were hearing instruction more from a different view than we have here. And so our youngest one said, well, I keep asking Jesus to come in my heart every day. So she just thought she had to, which is insecure. And we don't want them to feel like they're so insecure because we keep on driving it home and you have to believe, you have to believe. Trust that they believe. Trust the Lord that they believe. And if they say they believe and they're not showing fruit, just keep praying that they do show fruit.
That's good.
I was just going to add prayer to that. Just emphasize that. That's huge, and I mean that's just huge. And then also just to pray for others as a family. One of the little tricks that we had, fun little ways that we did that. At lunchtime, we had a little keychain, and it said "Pray hard," I think, on it. And we would put little tabs, little pieces of paper that we would stick onto that keychain with names of people that we specifically wanted to pray for. And some of them were, missionaries that we wanted to be faithful in praying for. But some of them were like personal needs that maybe someone had come up and asked us would we be willing to pray for them about something, and we wanted to be faithful in praying for that. One particular example was of for a husband or a dad who was not yet a believer, and to pray for him, for God to draw his heart. And so we prayed for him for so long, and he did become a believer, and it was such a huge encouragement to our kids. I mean, such a huge encouragement because they've been praying for him like at lunch every day for so long. So that was really cool. Yeah, so I really recommend doing that together. And just evangelism too, and service opportunities, like anytime that you can do that. Our kids, when they were in I think late middle school and high school, they attended a conference called Dare to Share, just about every year, and they would have opportunities to go out and share the gospel, and they taught them how to go about that in just a conversational way, and then we would do that as a youth group also through our church, and it was a good experience for the kids to put. Everything that they knew in their heads, and hearts, put them into their mouths and share that with others, and just practicing sharing Christ in just a regular conversation. It's a little bit of pressure, but they start doing that when they're younger. It is so much easier for them to talk about those things, and they're more excited, because it's good news and they've had the experience. And so, yeah, I would definitely encourage them to do that, because you know how it is. When you teach something, you learn it yourself if you have not already. So when your children are involved in teaching, sharing, the benefit is not only for the hearer, it's for the doer as well.
All right. All right, our next question might be a little similar, but can you think of one gospel truth related to homeschooling that you can share?
Well, I guess I would just go to the one that everybody jumps to is Proverbs 22:6. Train up your child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. God's promises to hold on to our children, and the reason even though I suppose that is what I'd say is my proof for homeschooling, there's very godly people that send their children to a physical school, or whatever you call it. I mean, not just public, but Christian or whatever. And their children become very godly, Christ-following people. But I guess because we felt that God was telling us in this scripture that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to train them ourselves, not send them somewhere else to be trained. Even though he uses other things and other means to train our children, that was just our convincing scripture, I guess, that we were supposed to be doing that, not anybody else.
Yeah.
I agree that it is definitely the parents' primary responsibility, and that I guess I would add to that we take care of our responsibility, but God is at the heart of it, and He's the one working and drawing their hearts, and so I mean, I agree with what you said, Dorcas, about. There are some families that I love dearly that have sent their children outside the home for school, and they have done extremely well. I do not think that any of us up here are saying that homeschooling is the answer. I think all of us would say Jesus is the answer, and no matter what you do, just point your children to Jesus, and that's really the answer. I don't necessarily think that well, I don't necessarily think that there is a definite correlation that you can make between homeschooling and the gospel, other than that it is our responsibility to train up our child. And that can be done very well in a lot of different ways. Homeschooling is one of those ways. It's a great way, and I don't regret it at all. And so I encourage you in it. But yeah, there are lots of good ways. Just keep sharing Jesus with your kids all the time.
Kristen mentioned earlier the Deuteronomy passage too, about all the different places that we go, and all through the day to be sharing with them. And I will just tell a short personal story about that with you for
You guys need to
about all that. There is a family attending our church now. They drive down from a small town across the river at the Quad Cities. They've only been coming here for this year, I think. This year is the first year they started coming. But they were in the church that I started out my faith in. I became a believer through a Bible study at age 14. And the church that I was going to, I don't remember whether they were there right away or whether they came later, but this man is 10 years older than me, and he was my Sunday school teacher when I was a teenager. But the story I want to tell is I was also their children's Sunday school teacher as well. And I was over at their house. They invited me to dinner. Specifically, they wanted to ask me a question. They wanted to talk to me. Homeschooling at that time was illegal in Iowa. I did not know what homeschooling was. So that day at dinner, they told me what homeschooling was. And they used the Deuteronomy passage that if you homeschool, you have myriad more opportunities to share everything with your children, especially about the Lord, and how important to them that was for their family. And so since homeschooling was illegal in Iowa at the time, but if you had contact hours with a certified teacher, the state would leave you alone. I was 18 years old, so I didn't have a degree or anything, but their children were young yet. And so they asked me, well, I was debating my college degree too. I was going to either study elementary education or library science. And I decided on elementary education for sure because of what they said about in Iowa, they would leave you alone if you had contact hours with I thought, well, then that means in Iowa, if you're a certified teacher, you'll be able to teach your own children even if it's still illegal when I get there. And so after they explained to me what homeschooling was, I felt like, and I don't use this word lightly, I felt like the Lord called me to homeschool our children at that time. And I know usually the word called is used for missionaries and pastors, but in this case, I really felt like the Lord was saying, this is exactly what you're going to do. And I confirmed my major through that. They ended up leaving the state. They were some of the cream of the crop that left the state because it was illegal in Iowa to homeschool. It did not become legal in Iowa to homeschool till my oldest was 4. So it hasn't been that long, guys. He's 35. So just 31 years has it been okay to homeschool in Iowa without legal ramifications. So some of the cream of the crop left the state of Iowa, and some left with social services chasing them to take their children away. So there's been people 10 years before me that helped this all be able to happen for all of us when the time came. There was one other point about their the brain. Oh, this is the hard part. So my husband, who I did not meet until I was 23 TV, I believe, so I was well out of college when I met him, and he knew that I told him the story, and he knew that I wanted to homeschool, and he said, well, that's fine. And then I was pregnant with our first child, 6 months pregnant, and he said, we're not going to homeschool. And I was, believe it or not, no, you'll believe it, totally devastated, totally crushed by that decision, and that decision was not based in anything but peer pressure for him. But I had just been writing a letter to a friend about something her husband was asking her to do, or her fiance was asking her to do. And my advice to her was advice I had to take myself, because it was share with him what you believe and why you believe it, but in the end, you have to submit to what he says to do. And so that advice was coming straight back to me. So I went to my husband, 6 months pregnant, in the tractor, and told him, I said, okay, we won't homeschool, but I'm going to be telling you all the reasons why I think we should be homeschooling as we go through these years while the children are growing up. And I'm not going to do it in a nagging way, or at least I won't mean to, but when I'm passionate about it, it's going to sound like I might be nagging, but I'm not meaning to. I don't remember saying much more than that, and when that firstborn was 6 months old, I walked in the living room, and my husband looked at me and said, we're homeschooling. We're not letting anybody else raise our kids. And he doesn't remember saying it, but he doesn't remember what he ate for breakfast. So anyway, that's a big round story about pointing the children to the gospel, but people pointing to you and you pointing other people also along the way as we walk this path, because it's not an easy journey, and it's hard when you see family and friends who do make a choice either way, to homeschool or to public school or to Christian school, when you see children not walking with the Lord, because it happens in all of the families. It doesn't just happen in the public and private school families, it happens in homeschool families too. So prayer and doing it together.
We were on the same question, right?
Yes.
Okay, all right. That's what I figured. All right, so in times of discouragement, when you feel like you're failing, were there any certain verses or truths that you really clung to that helped you the most? And what would you encourage us to do on those days?
I think these two gals are going to have way better encouragement for you. I just, across the board, anytime I'm discouraged, no matter what it is, I just turn to the Psalms. I've mostly been in the RP church, so, but only half of my childhood. So it's not like that's all I know is to sing the Psalms, so read them and, I was not a person that, ended up being very faithful as a young person, but God always led me to the Psalms every time I had a struggle, and so I just continued that habit once the Lord, of course, brought me back to himself, obviously. And you can just, every time I had a struggle, I would literally just open the book. And I'd say, whatever I'm reading, God is having me read. There were times when it's like, well, that doesn't really apply to why I'm upset right now, or why I'm discouraged. But God uses all of his words all the time. And so I still trusted in letting him just speak to me wherever I opened the Psalm book. I'd say that, I don't know, you could probably have a lot of individual verses that encourage you, when you're struggling with something specific. But that's just what I would encourage. If you're discouraged, you go to your quiet place, your closet. Who's the one that always put her apron over her face? And that was her quiet. And her kids had to leave her alone.
Susanna Wesley? Yeah. Yep.
Whatever you need to do. And then just pray God's word back to him, you know, just read his word in the Psalms in particular, I mean, and just pray those words back to him, or sing them back to him, however, whatever you want. That's what I would encourage you.
I love that you brought up singing, because that's one of the things that encourages me the most when I don't feel like I can do anything else. You know, if I'm so discouraged, it depends on the level. You know, you have different levels of discouragement, right? I mean, you have sometimes a really, really high level of discouragement, and that's close to despair, you know, and those are the times when you almost can't even open the Bible, you know, you almost can't even pray, but you can push play on some kind of song or something, or sit down at the piano or whatever it is, and just, you know, or just sing some, you know, a song that comes back to your mind that is, and it's amazing how God works through music that way, and worship to him, and sets your heart straight, you know. And so I would say that's an important one to remember in times of great need. But I would say, remember that you are going to fail, because we've all failed up here, and you are going to fail. And when you do, and when you get really discouraged, or, you know, if the kids are just really giving you a rough time of it, yeah, I mean, you guys have got to just pray. Like, you have to ask. I mean, in 1 John, I mean, he just instructs us just to ask, you know, ask for wisdom, and just ask and we will ask and we will receive. He's a good father. You know, he loves us, so he's going to give us what we need. So just ask, and then I would say, set aside, I mean, everyone's a little bit different as far as what they feel. I guess I don't like to ask for help. I'm kind of one of those people. I was more of one of those types of people. I guess it's become a little easier for me to ask for help, just through life's circumstances. I've had to learn and set aside any pride. And that's really, really hard. And you don't want to put people out, of course, either. But God has given us the church, and we're, you know, it's so great. It's so fun to help someone else. So give that person the opportunity to help you, and ask them. Just call someone or text them and say, I really need prayer right now. Would you pray with me? Just take a moment, you know, and pray with me right now, and let them have the opportunity to do that. I mean, we live in an age where you can do that, you know, where you can get a hold of somebody. Like, we have phones, you know, so just, you know, get on the phone and set aside your pride and just be like, I'm really need help. Like, and then you can pray for them too at the same time, and encourage them in whatever it is that, you know, that they're struggling with, because I can pretty much guarantee you that whoever it is you call, they're having something. Their day is not perfect either. So, so yeah, I would definitely really rely on prayer, and definitely we have so many the means of grace. You know, God's given us. Just rely on those, and not yourself, and not your own understanding. So.
I think remember the why, which revolves around that Deuteronomy passage, and for me, the story that I shared. When I'm the type of person that when I'm really discouraged, I really need my close Christian women friends is who I need to be with, or not just to call. I need to be there, and so our homeschool group was very spread out, all the way to Keokuk, and we didn't really go branch north. I think the Washington people branched other ways, but we went south. And so we would just say, okay, play day, and we're driving to Keokuk today, or we're driving to Carthage, Illinois today. And the other moms were also, we had enough of us that were willing to drop all academics and just spend the day together and let our children play and let the moms talk, and just dropped it all and just said, okay, let's just be together today. We need each other. I can name several that you wouldn't know, but most of you are familiar with Margie Nan, and Margie Nan and I were each other's go-to often over the years. We met when our youngest was 1 or 2, I guess. So, and all girls were in each other's weddings. Both our girls and Stacia, one of their girls. So, don't hesitate to call and say, "You want to drop everything today? Do you want to just get together? Because we're not getting anything done anyway. So you may as well have fun." So.
Well, I have a few more questions here, but I think it'd be more kind of nice to open up if there's anybody that has anything that they're kind of wanting to ask, that they've been thinking about, or, kind of curious to know. Well, while you're thinking, I was kind of thinking of one that kind of pertains to one we had here. And so, like the holidays are coming up, and we're about to be around a lot of family and friends and people that you may not quite understand why we're doing what we're doing. And I'm sure that you guys face similar comments or things like that. One of our questions here was, how did you hold firm to your decision to homeschool despite doubts of others? But I'm also curious to know, was there ever any comments that were said, and how did you handle them? So.
I have very rarely had issues with other people's disagreements in our choices. My in-laws, my father-in-law in particular, he was like, "What are you doing? Why are you even doing that?" Which didn't surprise us. But my mother-in-law was very supportive and everything. She passed away 9 years ago, and my father-in-law married again a year later. And of course, so our youngest just graduated 2 years ago, so they've been married long enough to see our homeschooling. And she was just ignored it. Now, she's not our grandma, she's an addition to our family. My kids are older, and so to them it was like, it's not grandma, it's this lady my grandpa married is ignoring the fact that we're homeschooling. Whatever. They didn't care because, we were already established. But that was the only discouragement we had in family. So they never said anything directly or against us. I don't know, my husband was not on board at first with homeschooling just because we're raising our children in the same area that he grew up in. So he was just like, "Well, I did fine in my school." And one of my reasons for homeschooling was because I did not, even though I'm not from here. I did go to public high school. I did not want my children to go to public school. That was the worst time of my life. I went to Christian schools all the way up till then. And I said, no, they are not going to public school, period. And there was no Christian schools at the time for our children to even go to, except for, there was a Mennonite, but it's that, what do they call that, where you learn you do your own work, so you might as well homeschool. It means, anyway, what was I saying? So, discouragement. So, anyway, but as soon as we started homeschooling, Rob was just like, "Yeah, Dad, this is what we're doing. This is okay. This is good. It'll be great." And then I only had one other person in my whole life. I'm probably very spoiled compared to most homeschooling parents. I have my own business and I do vendor shows. One lady came up and was going to buy some of my things. My daughter was helping me. She helped me a lot when middle school and up. Well, that's when I started, when she was about that age. And she was taking the money and everything. And she said, "Do you go to school here?" It was actually a Washington vendor show. And she goes, "Oh, what grade are you in?" And sometimes Emma would not remember that, which is normal. That's okay, because we don't have to have grades, but everybody asks that, so I always try to tell, okay, the kids, you're in this grade this year, so when everybody that doesn't know your homeschool asks, you know what to say. And then she says, oh, do you go to school here? And Emma said, I'm homeschooled. That lady's face dropped. She huffed and said, well, I guess I really want this, but I wouldn't have bought it if I had known.
Oh my.
And when you're not ready for that, you're just like, okay. Now, that happened now, I would say, no thank you. Here's your money, I'm keeping this. You're goodbye. I would have just said no. But that is the worst thing, and that's the only thing I've ever heard. So that's, like I said, if somebody had said that now, I would have definitely stood up for myself. But I just was in shock.
Oh, I bet it caught you off guard.
Totally,
yeah. I wouldn't have known what to say. Yeah.
And like in the grocery store, you'd, take the kids or Walmart or whatever. Oh, you have, why, but I did, for those things, I expected people to say, why are your kids with you in the middle of the day? And I always say, I homeschool. And I would just keep walking or whatever, If they didn't say anything, that's what I'm saying. That was the only way they actually said something. Usually if they're against it, they don't say anything at all. But most of the time would say, oh, that's great. I wish I could have done that. I couldn't have ever done that. And they go on, but they just praise you for your efforts. And so that's the opposite of what the question is. But that is what I found. Most people are supportive.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people are supportive. Yeah.
Of course, I have younger children. I mean, I'm 10 years behind these guys. So, 10 years might make a big difference to what you guys might have experienced too.
Well, usually people in the community who know you are generally not rude, at least, about it. Sometimes family can be rude about it if they're not in agreement, because they feel like they have the right to speak into your life a little bit more that way, I think. But a lot of times I think it just stems from them not understanding.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really helpful if you can just explain it to them. And I gave the book written by Christopher Klicka, called The Right Choice, to several different people. We would make jokes about it quite a bit too. We would say, because people would say, wow, you guys are done already? We're out doing something or whatever, and so people would see us, and the kids would be like, well, we're done with school, we homeschool or something like that. This would be like with people that we know kind of in our community. And I'd be like, yeah, it's amazing what you can get done when you don't have to stand in line all day. You can get things done, or something, and kind of just laugh, And so, they'd be like, oh, yeah. But we had a lot of comments similar to what you're saying about, where people would say, oh, I wish I could do that, or I wish I had the patience for that, or I wish I had the time, or I wish I could afford to, or something like that. And sometimes I would answer that, and sometimes I wouldn't. But a lot of times, if I did answer it, I would just say something like, I didn't think I could probably do it either, but, it would kind of set your mind to something you can do quite a bit more than what you think you can do. And or I would say, well, if I can do it, I think you can do it, or something like that. So, and then a lot of times people would be like, oh, well, I don't know, you're like practically an angel or something, well, you're seeing me in public, but yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, I would say you just have to, try to make light of those situations as much as possible, and just stick to your convictions. If you know that God has called you to do it, it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. So just go ahead and persevere, and just be polite to people, and try to just make light of it as much as you can with them, I would say. And if they are really serious, if they're like actually, very rude, like your example, and they're interested in more resources, you could ask them if they would like a resource, and that you can offer to, even drop it off for them or lend them a book or something like that. So, I mean, if they're really that concerned about your family's well-being, I mean, they may be. There may be people that are that way.
Public school teachers tend to give you the, okay, we're not going to continue this conversation.
Yeah.
They seem to be the hardest ones to get on board with you.
Yeah. So and in that regard, the one thing I was going to add was that for me it was very helpful to have my dad on my team. Yeah. So my dad was a college professor and kind of come from a family history of academia, and so it was very. It was important to me to have him on board when we began homeschooling. And so some of you may have heard, because I spoke to you last year, so some of I think I told this, but we had the opportunity to attend a homeschool conference, and grandparents were free to attend with any other paying ticket. So I asked my dad, would you go to this conference with me? And he said yes, he would. And he did, and we had a great time. And on the way home, he turned and looked at me and he said, you've got to do this. And I thought, yes. And I don't think anybody could have told me anything negative that would have outweighed that ever, like in all the years of homeschooling. So, if you have your husband and the people that are most important to you on your team, it's okay.
So many places. My family, my parents and my siblings were all very fine with it. But you have your degree. And so it took a lot of explaining to help people understand that just getting a degree in elementary education does not a teacher make. And yet I would tell them things like, okay, I substitute taught for 2.5 years, and then I taught 1 year in the Christian school, and that's all I ever taught. And I learned how to teach by teaching in the public school, or in the Christian school that I taught. I didn't learn how to teach by going to college for 4 years, because you don't really learn, you just learn the principles behind it. You really don't learn. I mean, you learn how to make crafts. You learn how to do some basic things, but you really don't learn how to put it into practice until you do it. And then I would also tell parents that they were the ones that knew their children better than anybody else, better than any teacher, anybody, anywhere. They would know. We had a few out in the public. I didn't hesitate to take the kids out in public when we were homeschooling, and rarely did anybody make any negative. The worst was in the Y when they were coming out of their swimming lessons, and a guy at the counter waiting to go do whatever he was doing there. Why aren't your kids in school? Because we homeschool. They should be in school. So, well, they're not. They're here having swimming lessons. And he wanted. I think he wanted to. Yeah. And I have the confidence to go ahead and speak that way, even then, because I really felt firmly about it from the very beginning. My doubts were, am I doing it right? I knew I should be doing it, but am I doing it right, or am I doing it well? The hardest place for me was here. And I have to be careful in how I share this, because I don't want to offend anybody, because the women whose children were raised at the same time my children were raised here are my friends and my peers here still. And so
That's where I got the least support, but it was silent. We'll just say that. It was silent, yes, it was tolerance in front of me. But as our children learned from their peers, it wasn't silent at home. And so our children suffered as well, because the attitudes of the parents traveled to the children, and then your children here back in a small church. So, but that was back before. And then Olivia shared with me that there was an elderly couple in church. Some of the elderly couples too were like, what are you doing? You're cheating your kids out of so much by not letting them go to school. And it was silly things like, they're going to miss out on riding the bus and new clothes and new lunch boxes. And I'm like, oh well. But they were also serious about their hesitancy to support us, but they never did say why. And one of the men, before he passed, both of these people had passed, before he passed, he said to me, "You've done the right thing and you've done a good job." And he was one of the ones that was one of these, "I'm not sure you're doing the right thing." And then Olivia told me that his wife shared that with her, that we had done the right thing before she passed. And I didn't know that till Olivia shared it not that long ago. So keep on doing it. You're an example to the others around you too, even when you're failing. Because they're failing too, and those moms who put their kids in public school, they suffered too. Because they suffer from their decisions in different ways than we suffer from ours. And we suffer too, because we don't always make the right decisions for our kids in the homeschool setting, any more than our friends that put them in public or Christian school make those right decisions. So the sad thing is, sometimes there's too much of a division. You're not sharing your suffering and your struggles at the same time you're having them. We're all in our 60s now, so now we're starting to share the struggles we had back then. None of us felt safe with each other to share that intimately about the raising of our children at that point once school age hit, because we did something so different. I think we could talk now, but there's also several teachers in the school as well. There's a church that are still teachers. And like you said, teachers also have this definite opinion that unless you're trained, you can't do this. Mm-hmm. And yet, I kept my teaching certificate up just in case I needed it, and to make it easier to be legal in Iowa until about 10 years ago. And so I took a lot of recertification courses with community people down in Burlington. And I was very careful when it came to telling what we're doing. Mostly it was just, I'm just keeping my certificate up just in case. Didn't say anything about what I was doing with it to be legal for homeschooling. But sometimes there'd be a really cool camaraderie in the class that I would be in, and I would feel just safe enough to say, at least at lunchtime to a few, what I was doing. And every single time I did, to a person, they would say, "Wow, if I had to do it over again," because they'd be my age, "if I had to do it over again, I'd have done it," because it didn't work well, what we did. And so they just didn't know enough, or they were also working moms, so they couldn't necessarily do it because of that. So the teachers are still, they're also seeing their own lives and their own children's struggles, so they're also understanding too. So I think some of the teachers are starting to understand, yeah, this isn't a perfect situation either.
Yeah.
Yeah, my mom was one of those who was working in the elementary at the public school, and she was very encouraging to us as far as our homeschool journey. So they do know.
Well, our time's kind of wrapped up, so I just want to thank you ladies so very much for letting us pick your brains. I feel like it wasn't even near enough time, So yeah, thank you so much for coming. I so appreciate it. We all greatly do, and I'm sure we'll be picking your brains here over the next few minutes before you head out the door. So, but yeah. So, all right, thank you so much. I'll just say a quick prayer here too before we go. Okay. So, Holy Father, I just thank you so very, very much, just for your providence and just how you have set these ladies apart to do this task that really probably wasn't at all normal or common in the day and might have felt like going against the grain. but you've just always shown up, and you've just continued to fill them and help them through this journey. And then you just so graciously have brought them into our lives here for us to be able to just be encouraged and enlightened and reminded of just different truths of why we're doing what we're doing. I just pray that you'll bless them over this holiday month, and just that they'll have such a wonderful time with their families. And I pray that you'll bless everybody here as we go home as well. And I just thank you so much, and I pray that you'll continue to bless this group. In your holy name I pray. Amen.
Can I make a little plug for the Homeschool Iowa? I don't know if anybody's gone to that, or I know Olivia has. But I have attended since Micah was going into kindergarten. And then when Emma Ruth was in high school, I started volunteering. And I still volunteer every year since. And I just love that program. When I very first started attending, everybody, the group started, that program started from the pioneers of homeschooling in Iowa. That's who started it, so it's been going on that long. And when I was in the HASAP, the Homeschool Assistance Program, and and everybody said, you gotta get out of there. But they still were encouraging, even though I was in that. So they're really, and it's a Christian organization. So anybody who doesn't know about it, it's a Christian organization. It's Christian based. It is not involved in the government. When a gal moved here, and she was going to start homeschooling when her kids were old enough. At first I said, go to that. That'll help you get, because there's curriculum there, there's speakers. It's just a hugely encouraging conference. It's always in June, or has been the last few years. And that first weekend, you'll have to look. It's homeschooliowa.org. But she said, oh, I don't want to be involved in the government. And I was like, oh, no. Why does everybody assume that if there's an organization, it has to be government-based? I'm not sure where that comes from. So I want to encourage you, it's not. They don't like government things. They want government to go away. This is our privilege and right to raise our children. So, and it's Christian based. So if you have the opportunity to go to that conference, it has been a blessing to me, even after being finished homeschooling, because I like seeing all the new parents and all their little people, and it's really a fun opportunity. Or volunteer if you want to volunteer for it.
Sometimes I went by myself. It was wonderful. It was a weekend on my own, and then Jim would go with me. Someone would kiss me over the next day. Yeah, I think it was.